I stepped into the meeting room, relief washing over me as I expected another mundane day at the office. The hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of stale coffee filled the air, a familiar backdrop to my routine. But then, I froze. There, leaning casually against the conference table, was Jake, my colleague, my secret temptation. His eyes locked onto mine, a playful glint dancing in their depths. "You're early," he said, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. My heart raced, and I forced a casual laugh, but the air around us crackled with an undeniable tension. It felt as if the world outside had faded away, leaving just the two of us in this charged moment. What was happening between us? I could feel the question hovering, unspoken, yet heavy. It was a dangerous game we were playing, but I couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through me. Jake stepped closer, and I could almost taste the electricity in the air. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice low and inviting. I swallowed hard, my thoughts racing. Did he feel it too, this magnetic pull? I fought against the urge to reach out, to close the distance that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "It's just work," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but my voice betrayed me, trembling slightly. He raised an eyebrow, a challenge in his gaze. "Really? Because it feels like there's something more." His words hung between us, igniting a spark I knew I shouldn't entertain. Yet a part of me was already lost, wondering how one unexpected moment could shift everything I thought I knew. I still remember the day Jake walked into our office in New York like it was yesterday. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was busy settling in for what I thought would be just another ordinary day at work. I was married to David, who was everything I ever thought I wanted. But then Jake appeared, and everything changed. He had this aura about him, a confidence that was impossible to ignore. As he introduced himself to the team, I felt a flutter in my stomach. It was ridiculous, I thought. I was a married woman, and here I was, feeling a spark of attraction for a new colleague. Jake was handsome, with tousled dark hair and deep blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. I tried to shake off the feeling, reminding myself of my commitment to David. Later that day, we found ourselves in the break room, both reaching for the last coffee pod. Our fingers brushed against each other, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. "Looks like it's just you and me for a cup of coffee," Jake said with a playful smirk. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, trying to sound casual even as my heart raced. We ended up sitting at a small table, sipping our coffee and talking. The conversation flowed effortlessly, filled with laughter and stolen glances. We discovered we shared interests that went beyond work, a love for classic literature, similar taste in music, and a passion for travel. I could feel the chemistry between us growing stronger with each passing moment. I glanced at Jake as he animatedly talked about his favorite books, and I found myself hanging on to every word he said. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I knew I shouldn't be feeling this way, but I couldn't help it. "Have you read anything by Sylvia Day?" Jake asked, leaning in a bit closer. The way he looked at me made my breath catch. "Actually, yes. I loved Baird to You," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Same here. The tension in that book is incredible," he said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. As we talked, I could feel the walls I had built around my heart starting to crumble. I was aware of my wedding ring glinting in the light, a constant reminder of my vows. But sitting there with Jake, I felt a thrill that I hadn't experienced in years. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. After that first coffee, we started to have more casual encounters. We would bump into each other more frequently, exchanging flirtatious remarks and lingering looks. I couldn't deny there was something undeniably magnetic between us. Each time we spoke, there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something that felt like it was waiting to erupt. One afternoon, as we were working late on a project, Jake leaned over my desk to discuss some ideas. Our shoulders brushed against each other, and I felt a rush of heat. I looked up at him, and he was already staring back at me with that same intense gaze. "I think we make a pretty good team," he said, a hint of mischief in his voice. I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I guess we do." He hesitated for a moment, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. "You know, working late isn't so bad when you have good company." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. There was something in his tone that suggested he wanted more than just a professional relationship. My mind was screaming at me to step back, to remember my life with David, but my heart was leading me in a different direction. As the weeks went by, our interactions became more charged. I caught myself daydreaming about Jake during meetings, imagining what it would be like to be with him. I felt guilty, but the excitement was intoxicating. One evening, while discussing ideas for our project, our hands brushed again. This time, it was different. It lingered, and I felt a spark, a connection that was undeniable. "Sorry," Jake said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to." But he didn't pull away. Instead, he looked into my eyes, and in that moment, all rational thought left me. I felt a rush of adrenaline, a wild urge to cross that line. "Maybe we should stop pretending," I said, my heart pounding. Jake stepped closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "What if I don't want to stop?" I felt my resolve melting away. I wanted to say no, to pull back and remember my life with David. But the truth was, I didn't want to. There was something about Jake that made me feel alive, something that reignited a spark I had thought was long extinguished. And then, in an impulsive moment, we leaned in and our lips met. It was a soft kiss at first, hesitant, but it quickly deepened as the heat of our attraction engulfed us. I knew I was crossing a line I shouldn't be, but in that moment, all I could think about was Jake and the way he made me feel. I pulled back, breathless and terrified of what I had just done. I can't do this," I stammered, my heart racing. Jake looked at me with a mixture of desire and understanding. "I know it's complicated, but I can't help how I feel. Can you?" I wanted to say no, to insist that I was committed to my marriage, but deep down, I knew the answer. The connection I felt with Jake was something I had been missing for far too long. As I looked into his eyes, I realized that whatever had started between us was only going to grow stronger, and I was terrified of what that meant for my life and my marriage. The thrill of the unknown was exhilarating, and the danger of it all made my heart race. I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump. The project that had us burning the midnight oil at the company headquarters was meant to be just another task, another late night spent poring over spreadsheets and presentations. I had prepared myself for what I thought would be a long evening, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the faint scent of stale coffee lingering in the air. Little did I know, this night would change everything. The office was nearly empty, just a few stray souls lingering in the corners, their eyes glued to their screens. I found Jake hunched over his desk, the glow of his computer illuminating his face. He looked up as I entered, a spark of mischief dancing in his eyes. "Thought I'd be here all alone," he said, his voice low, almost playful. "Guess we're both stuck here then," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my heart raced at the sight of him. It was ridiculous how a simple glance from him could send shivers down my spine. Jake had always had that effect on me, ever since he joined the team. As we settled into our work, I could feel the tension building, an invisible thread tugging us closer together. We exchanged ideas, our voices a soft murmur in the quiet room. I could sense Jake leaning in, his shoulder brushing against mine. The accidental touch felt electric, igniting something in me that I thought was long buried beneath the facade of my marriage. "Did you get a chance to look at the latest figures?" he asked, his face so close to mine that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I nodded, my mind momentarily blank as I struggled to concentrate. It felt as if the world around us faded away, leaving just the two of us in a bubble of unspoken possibilities. Then it happened. A simple gesture that sent my heart racing. Jake reached out to point at a chart on my screen, his fingers lightly grazing my arm. The warmth of his touch lingered, and I swallowed hard, my breath hitching in my throat. "Sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but I could hear the underlying tension there. "No, it's fine," I managed to reply, my pulse quickening. I didn't want him to retract his hand, to pull away. Somehow, I craved his closeness, the way he made me feel alive. Before I knew it, we were standing in the narrow hallway outside the conference room, discussing our project in hushed tones. I could see the flickering lights of the city through the glass windows, but all I could focus on was Jake. He was leaning in closer, his breath warm against my skin. "You really did a great job with this," he said, his eyes locked onto mine. I felt a flutter in my stomach, a mixture of pride and something else, something much more dangerous. And then it happened. A moment that felt both like a mistake and a revelation. He leaned in, and I didn't pull away. Our lips met softly at first, a tentative brush that quickly turned into something more desperate, more consuming. I had never expected to kiss him, especially not here, but it felt right in all the wrong ways. It was as though the kiss unleashed a floodgate of emotions I had kept locked away for too long. "Wow," he breathed, pulling back slightly, his eyes searching mine. I didn't know if you felt the same way." "I didn't either," I admitted, my heart racing as I glanced around, half expecting someone to walk in and catch us. But it was just us, cloaked in the shadows of the empty office. This is crazy. Crazy good," he said, a teasing smile playing on his lips. The way he looked at me made me feel beautiful, desired. It was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but lean in again, craving more of him. But just as quickly as the moment began, I felt a rush of overwhelming guilt. What was I doing? I was married, living a life that revolved around David and our carefully constructed world. I pulled away, my heart pounding. "We shouldn't," I whispered, the weight of my words heavy in the air. "Why not?" Jake replied, his voice desperate. "We have something here, something real." "Real?" I echoed, searching his eyes. "I can't just throw everything away." "I'm not asking you to throw anything away. Just think about it," he said, his brow furrowing in concern. "I don't want to lose this." The conflict within me was palpable. I felt the thrill of what we had shared, but I also felt the chains of my commitment to David. I couldn't just walk away from my life. But as I looked into Jake's eyes, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the spark I had been missing. The excitement, the passion. "I need to go," I said finally, my voice trembling as I turned to leave. But Jake reached out, grabbing my wrist gently, his touch sending another jolt of electricity through me. "Don't go," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "We can talk more about this. Just give me a chance." I hesitated, caught between my responsibilities and the exhilarating pull of my desires. The office felt heavy, the air thick with tension as I stood there, unsure of what to do next. I wanted to stay, to explore this connection further, but I also knew that crossing this line would change everything. But in that moment, with his eyes locked on mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of a cliff, teetering between the safe ground of my marriage and the thrilling uncertainty of something new, something forbidden. The messages started innocently enough, a few quick texts here and there, but before long, they were becoming bolder, more daring. I found myself staring at my phone, heart racing as I read Jake's words. "What are you wearing?" he asked one afternoon, a flirty smile evident even through the screen. I bit my lip, glancing at David, who was blissfully unaware as he slept next to me. I felt a rush of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the thrill of Jake's attention. My dreams were filled with him. I would wake up panting, my heart racing, the sheets tangled around my legs. It was always the same. Jake's hands on my body, his lips on mine, the feeling of being alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I would roll over and see David, peaceful and trusting, and the guilt would hit me like a wave. How could I do this to him? Yet the thought of Jake made me forget my conscience, even if just for a moment. One evening, I concocted a story for David about a late meeting with the marketing team. He nodded, not looking up from his laptop, and I felt a pang of remorse as I slipped out the door. My heart raced as I walked to my car, knowing where I was headed. I was excited, terrified, and exhilarated all at once. The thrill of deception wrapped around me like a warm blanket. When I arrived at the cafe where Jake and I had decided to meet, I could hardly breathe. I quickly checked my reflection in the glass door, fixing my hair and smoothing down my blouse. As I stepped inside, I spotted him at our usual table, a sly grin spreading across his face as he caught sight of me. "Hey there," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I wondered if you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, unable to hide my smile. The air between us crackled with unspoken tension, a mix of danger and desire that made my pulse quicken. We settled into our usual banter, but this time it felt charged, electric. "You know," Jake said, leaning in slightly, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." "Yeah?" I asked, my heart pounding. "What about?" He smirked, his gaze locking onto mine. "About how easy it would be for us to just forget everything else." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. "Jake, we can't. I can't." But even as I said it, a part of me was screaming to give in, to explore this connection that was becoming harder to ignore. "Why not?" he challenged, his voice low and teasing. "You deserve to be happy, don't you?" His words hung in the air, and I felt a heat rising in my cheeks. "Of course, but David is not the one making you feel alive," he replied, his gaze intense. I looked down, unable to meet his eyes, knowing he was right. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, and the moment shattered. I reached for it, glancing at the screen. David's name flashed, and my heart sank. "I should go," I said, suddenly feeling trapped. "Wait," Jake said, grabbing my hand lightly. "Just think about it, okay? We could have something really special." I wanted to believe him, but my thoughts were muddled with guilt and fear. I nodded slowly, pulling my hand away. "I'll think about it," I promised, but inside, I was already feeling the pull of temptation. As I drove home, I replayed our conversation in my mind. The way he looked at me, the way his words ignited a fire within me. I entered the house quietly, trying to be as stealthy as possible. David was still working, and I felt a rush of relief mixed with guilt. But the next morning, the cycle continued. The messages became more daring, each one pushing my boundaries further. "What are you doing later?" Jake would text, and I found myself responding with something flirty, my heart racing with each reply. I started lying to David more frequently, concocting elaborate tales about late meetings or dinner with friends. The thrill of the deception made my heart race, but it was the moments with Jake that truly set my soul on fire. One night, after a particularly flirty exchange, I found myself sitting on my bed, phone in hand, feeling reckless. "I can't keep doing this," I whispered to myself, but my thumb hovered over the screen as I typed out a response. "I want to see you." The reply came almost instantly. "Tonight?" I hesitated, glancing at David, who was already asleep beside me. "Yes," I typed, heart pounding in my chest. The thrill of that decision wrapped around me like a drug. I felt alive, and the guilt was slowly transforming into an intoxicating rush. As I lay in bed, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Jake. It was a dangerous game I was playing, but the fire he ignited within me was too strong to ignore. As the days turned into nights filled with secret messages and stolen glances, I knew I was crossing a line. But every time I looked at David, sleeping peacefully, I felt the weight of my choice. I was living a lie, but the thrill of being with Jake, of feeling wanted in a way I hadn't in years, was becoming an addiction I could hardly resist. I made a decision that changed everything. It was impulsive, reckless, and yet, it felt exhilarating. The idea of meeting Jake in a hotel in Manhattan stirred something deep within me. I remember standing outside the hotel, my heart racing, each beat echoing my anticipation mixed with fear. As I stepped into the elevator, I could feel the tension building, almost like a tangible force. I pressed the button for the top floor, and with each passing moment, the air became thicker. I glanced at my reflection in the polished metal doors. My cheeks flushed, and I wondered what I was doing. I was betraying David, the man who had always been there for me, yet here I was, chasing something I could not fully understand. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. I took a deep breath, my stomach churning with excitement and guilt. As I walked towards the room, I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I knocked softly, and the door opened almost immediately. Jake stood there, his eyes dark and inviting. "You made it," he said, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "I almost didn't," I admitted, stepping inside as he pulled me closer, closing the door behind us. The moment I crossed the threshold, the weight of the outside world fell away. It was just him and me, in this small bubble of secrecy. The room was dimly lit, elegant but understated. I could feel the heat radiating off Jake's body, and before I knew it, he leaned in and captured my lips in a kiss. It was electric. I had never felt anything like it. It was as if every longing I had buried deep inside me was suddenly unleashed. I melted against him, losing myself in the taste of him, the smell of his cologne, the warmth of his hands on my back. "What are we doing?" I whispered against his lips, though a part of me didn't want an answer. "Something we've both wanted for a while," he replied, his voice low and filled with a kind of hunger that made my pulse quicken. I could feel a thrill run through me. I had yearned for this, yet the reality of my choices loomed over my mind. "Jake, what if someone finds out?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Let them," he said with a confidence that both thrilled and frightened me. "Right now, it's just us." He kissed me again, and I let my worries slip away, if only for a moment. I surrendered to the passion that surged between us. I felt alive, vibrant, as if every nerve ending was on fire. We moved to the bed, and I could feel the tension in the air shift, becoming almost unbearable. Jake's hands roamed my body, exploring every curve, every inch of my skin, igniting flames of desire that I had kept hidden for too long. I gasped as he pressed his body against mine, the heat radiating between us almost suffocating. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my ear, his breath hot and tantalizing. I shook my head, feeling dizzy with longing. "Don't you dare," I breathed, my resolve crumbling under the weight of my desire. The night unfolded in a blur of passion. We lost ourselves in each other, shedding the layers of our everyday lives. Every kiss deepened my connection with him, and every touch sent waves of pleasure coursing through my body. I had never felt so desired, so alive. "God, you're incredible," Jake whispered, his hands tangled in my hair as he looked into my eyes. I didn't reply. Lost in the moment, my world reduced to just him and the sensations we were creating together. I felt liberated, as though I was breaking free from a cage I had not even realized I was in. As the night wore on, we lay entwined, breathing heavily, the reality of what we had done slowly creeping back into my mind. I knew I had crossed a line, but the thrill of it sent shivers down my spine. Jake brushed his fingers along my arm, sending goosebumps racing across my skin. "We shouldn't have done this," he said softly, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "I know," I replied, feeling the weight of my choices pressing down on me. "But I can't say I regret it." He smiled, a wicked grin that made my heart race again. "Neither do I. But what now?" I felt a knot form in my stomach. What now, indeed? The thrill of the night clashed with the reality of my life outside this hotel room. I had a husband waiting for me at home, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within me. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake's expression softened, and he brushed a strand of hair away from my face. "We'll figure it out," he said, though the uncertainty hung in the air between us. I closed my eyes, letting the moment wash over me one last time. I had opened a door I could never close, and as I lay there with Jake, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. Whatever lay ahead, I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The morning after was a whirlwind of emotions, a chaotic mix of guilt and exhilaration. I lay in bed, the sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the room that felt so familiar, yet so foreign. David was still asleep beside me, his breathing steady and calm, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, but instead, I felt a heavy weight on my chest. How could I face him knowing what I had done? As I got ready for work, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my hair slightly disheveled from last night's passionate escapade. It was a stark contrast to the composed woman I had been just a day before. I dressed in a suit that felt too tight, the fabric clinging to me like a reminder of my betrayal. I tried to focus on the routine, the makeup, the hair, the little details that defined my professional life. Yet, all I could think about was Jake. The drive to the office was a blur. My mind was racing with thoughts of our time together, the way he had looked at me, his eyes dark with desire, how his hands had felt on my body. I shook my head, trying to dispel the memories that threatened to consume me. I parked my car and took a deep breath before stepping into the building. Once inside, the atmosphere felt different. I could sense the weight of my secret and the thrill it brought me. I walked down the corridor, each step echoing in my mind, reminding me of the lines I was crossing. The office was buzzing with the usual chatter, but I felt like I was in a different world, one where everyone was oblivious to my inner turmoil. "Hey, you okay?" my colleague Sarah asked, giving me a concerned look as I passed her desk. "Yeah, just a bit tired," I replied, forcing a smile. I made my way to my cubicle, trying to keep my head down and focus on my work. But as I sat down, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Can we talk?" My heart raced. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching as I quickly typed back, "Me too. See you at lunch?" The anticipation was almost unbearable. I spent the morning in a daze, my mind drifting to thoughts of him, of us. We had crossed a line, and I was both terrified and thrilled. The clock seemed to move too slowly, each tick echoing in my ears. reminding me of the decision I had made. When lunch finally arrived, I found myself in the small cafe around the corner, my hands trembling slightly as I stirred my coffee. Jake arrived just a few minutes later, his presence filling the space with an electric energy. He smiled, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from me, his eyes bright. "You look beautiful." "Thanks," I replied, unable to hide the blush creeping across my cheeks. "You too." We fell into conversation easily, but the words felt charged, laden with unspoken desires. I could feel the tension rising between us, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened and what could still happen. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, leaning forward, his voice low and serious. "What we did, it felt so right." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "But it's wrong, Jake. I can't keep lying to David." He reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine, sending a jolt through me. "What if we just don't think about that right now? Just focus on us." I hesitated, torn between my responsibilities and my desires. The thrill of our secret was intoxicating, but the guilt was suffocating. "I don't know if I can do that." "Come on," he urged, his eyes locking onto mine. "Just one more time. Let's not ruin this by overthinking it." His words hung in the air, tempting and dangerous. I could feel the pull towards him, the longing that had built up since the moment we first met. The thrill of the chase, the adrenaline of secrecy. It was almost too much to resist. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my choices pressing down on me. "Okay," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "One more time." The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of laughter and stolen glances, each moment igniting the fire that had started to burn between us. As we parted ways, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. The familiar ache of guilt began to settle back in, but the thrill of our secret ignited something within me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Back at my desk, I struggled to focus. The work emails and reports felt trivial compared to the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I glanced at the clock, counting down the minutes until I could see him again. The anticipation was almost unbearable, and I could hardly concentrate on my tasks. As the day dragged on, I felt the weight of my choices bearing down on me. I was living a double life, and the rush of excitement was accompanied by an ever-present fear of being discovered. It was a dangerous game we were playing, and I was all in. Yet, as I glanced at the empty chair across from me, I wondered how long I could keep this up. The thrill was intoxicating, but the reality of my life with David loomed over me like a dark cloud. I was caught in a web of passion and deceit, and there was no turning back now. I still remember the moment Jake suggested we escape for the weekend. It felt like a spark igniting in my chest, a thrill that pulled me closer to the edge of desire. We were both sitting at our usual cafe, the smell of fresh coffee swirling around us, laughter echoing from nearby tables. I was trying to focus on the conversation, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the last time we were together, the heat of his touch still lingering on my skin. "Let's get out of the city for a bit," Jake said casually, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Just you and me, no distractions." I felt a rush of excitement at his words, but a wave of guilt hit me almost immediately. I thought of David, my husband, sleeping soundly at home, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my heart. I don't know, Jake. What would I say to David? "Tell him you're going away with your friends. It's not a lie if you think about it," he replied, leaning closer, his voice low and enticing. "We deserve a break. Just think about it. The two of us, somewhere beautiful, away from everything." I could hardly breathe as I weighed the options in my mind. The thought of a weekend away with Jake filled me with a yearning I hadn't felt in so long. It was reckless, thrilling, and yet the thought of deceiving David made my stomach twist. But the pull of Jake was undeniable. "What if he suspects something?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a part of me desperate for him to reassure me. "Let's not think about that now. Just imagine the freedom," Jake replied, his gaze intense and unwavering. "We can have fun, laugh, be ourselves without worrying about anything. It could be our little secret." His words danced in the air between us, and I felt a rush of adrenaline at the idea. I nodded slowly, feeling my resolve weaken. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll tell him I'm going away." The lie felt like a weight on my chest, but the thrill of what was to come overshadowed my doubts. When I got home later that day, I plastered on a smile for David, who was settled on the couch, engrossed in a book. "Hey babe," I said, trying to sound casual. "I was thinking of going away for the weekend with some friends. Just a little getaway." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Oh? That sounds nice. Where are you going?" "I haven't really decided yet, just a couple of places in mind," I replied, my heart racing. Each word felt like a betrayal, but I pushed the feelings aside. "It's nothing too exciting, just a chance to relax." "Sounds good. You deserve a break," he said, returning to his book, completely oblivious. I breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that he accepted my excuse without question. The days leading up to the weekend were filled with anticipation. I could hardly concentrate at work, counting down the hours until I would be with Jake again. Each glance and every casual touch in the office felt charged with electricity, heightening my excitement and anxiety. Finally, the day arrived. As I made my way to the hotel, my heart raced with both fear and exhilaration. What would it be like to be alone with him, free from the confines of our everyday lives? I tried to calm myself, but the thrill of our secret made my pulse race. When I walked into the hotel room, Jake was already there, waiting for me. The moment I stepped inside, he closed the door behind me, and the world outside faded away. The air was thick with tension, a hungry anticipation hanging between us. "Hey," he said, his voice low as he stepped closer. "I've been thinking about this all week." "Me too," I admitted, feeling a rush of heat wash over me as he reached out, brushing his fingers against my arm. The simple touch sent shivers down my spine. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," he said, his gaze locking onto mine, filled with a mix of desire and urgency. "But I don't want to waste a second." Before I could respond, he pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around my waist. The heat radiating from him enveloped me, and I melted against him. Our lips met, and the kiss ignited a fire within me, one that had been stifled for too long. We stumbled back towards the bed, our kisses deepening with every step. The reality of my life, the guilt of my choices, faded into the background as I surrendered to the moment. In those stolen hours, nothing else mattered but him and the intoxicating connection we shared. As the night unfolded, I lost myself in a whirlwind of passion and desire. My worries washed away in the heat of our embrace. Each touch, each kiss, was a reminder of the reckless path I had chosen, but the exhilaration was addictive. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, and for once, I didn't want to think about the consequences. The thrill of our secret kept me on edge, the fear of being discovered only adding to the intensity of our connection. As we lay tangled together, I knew this weekend would change everything. I was caught between two worlds, one filled with love and stability, the other with passion and excitement. With every heartbeat, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. But in that moment, with Jake's arms around me, I couldn't bring myself to care. The danger, the thrill, the freedom, it was intoxicating, and I was willing to risk it all for just one more taste. The pressure was building, and I could feel it weighing on my chest like a heavy blanket. Returning to my routine after that weekend away with Jake had been harder than I expected. Each day felt like a tightrope walk, balancing my life with David and the thrill of my secret with Jake. I thought I could handle it, but the anxiety was creeping in. David noticed, of course. How could he not? He was perceptive in ways I had come to appreciate, but now I found myself resenting it. "Are you all right?" he asked one morning. Concern etched on his face as I absently stirred my coffee. "You seem a bit distracted lately." I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just a busy week at work, I guess," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray me. He nodded, though I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes. I turned my gaze out of the window, trying to shake the feeling of guilt that wrapped around my heart like a vice. The truth was I was distracted, but it wasn't work. It was thoughts of Jake, of our stolen moments that felt like fire in my veins. Back at the office, I could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The usual camaraderie with my colleagues felt like a facade, and every glance I exchanged with Jake sent a jolt of electricity through me. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to him. The way he smiled at me, the way his eyes would linger a second too long. I caught him watching me across the room one afternoon, a smirk playing on his lips. I felt my cheeks flush, and the tension in the air was palpable. It was as if we were the only two people in the room, surrounded by the hum of office chatter that faded into the background. After a few moments, he sauntered over, casual, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, though I could feel the lie forming on my lips. "Just busy, you know." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "You're hiding something. I can see it in your eyes." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," he said, stepping closer. "We both know it's not just work. We need more time together, don't you think?" I could feel my heart race at his words, the thrill of our secret igniting once more. But the thought of David crept back in, a shadow over my excitement. "Jake, I don't know if I can. David is starting to notice things." "Let him notice," Jake said, a hint of defiance in his tone. "You deserve more than this, more than just a normal life. You deserve passion." His words were like a siren song, tempting me to leap into the unknown. But the weight of my choices bore down on me. "I know, but it's complicated. I can't just throw everything away." "Can't you?" he challenged, his gaze intense. "What about us? What about what we have?" I closed my eyes for a moment, envisioning everything I had built with David, the stability, the comfort. But then I thought of Jake, the excitement, the passion that made me feel alive again. It was a war within me, and I felt like I was losing. "Let's just take it one day at a time," I finally said, though my voice lacked conviction. Jake nodded, but I could see the disappointment flicker across his face. "I just want more time with you. I can't keep doing this part-time relationship thing." "I know," I murmured, "but you have to understand." Before I could finish, the door swung open, and one of our colleagues walked in, breaking the moment. Jake stepped back, a mask of professionalism slipping into place. "I'll see you later," he said, his eyes lingering on me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. As I returned to my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The walls seemed to close in around me, each tick of the clock reminding me of the lies I was living. David was good to me. He deserved better than a wife who was torn between two worlds. But then there was Jake, with his wild charm and the way he made me feel. I thought about our adventures, the moments we shared that were full of fire and freedom. I craved that more than I cared to admit, and the thought of losing it felt like losing a part of myself. That evening, I found myself staring at my phone, debating whether to text Jake. I felt the pull of our connection, the need for reassurance that I wasn't alone in this chaos. Just a simple message, a reminder that what we had was real. But I hesitated, recalling the look on David's face that morning. I had promised myself to be good, to try and make things right. Yet, the thought of Jake, of his touch, of the way he made me laugh, was intoxicating. Finally, my fingers moved on their own, typing out a message. "Can we talk later?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course. I need to see you." My heart raced at his words. The excitement mingled with anxiety, but I couldn't deny that I wanted to see him. I wanted to feel that thrill again, even if it meant risking everything. As the evening wore on, I felt the pressure of my double life tightening around me. The thrill of Jake was intoxicating, but the reality of David's love was a heavy weight I couldn't ignore. I was caught between two worlds, and I had no idea how long I could keep pretending everything was fine. The clock ticked away, and with each passing minute, I felt my resolve crumble. The pressure was building, and I could feel the walls closing in. Would I choose the safe path, or would I give in to the wild, reckless passion that Jake ignited within me? I walked into the office that morning, expecting another mundane day filled with meetings and deadlines. My heart raced a little as I made my way to the meeting room, the usual mix of caffeine and anticipation bubbling inside me. But as I pushed the door open, the sight of Jake sitting there alone made my breath hitch. He looked up, a smirk playing on his lips, and suddenly the air felt electric. "Hey there," he said, his voice low and teasing. "Jake," I managed, trying to keep my composure. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Just getting a head start on some work," he replied, leaning back in his chair, eyes glinting with mischief. The casualness of his tone did little to mask the tension that hung between us. It was as if the world outside had faded away, leaving just the two of us in this charged space. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, questioning what was happening between us. My mind flickered back to the last few weeks, the stolen moments, the lingering glances. "What are you really doing here?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but my voice trembled slightly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze intense. Maybe I was hoping for a little more than just work. A shiver ran down my spine as his words settled over me. "Jake, we shouldn't..." I started, but the truth was, a part of me was desperate to say yes. The thrill of our connection was intoxicating, and I found myself wanting to explore it further. "Why not?" he challenged, his eyes locked onto mine. "We're both adults, and let's be honest, there's something between us." I bit my lip, contemplating the consequences. I was married to David, my husband who trusted me without question. But the temptation Jake presented was too alluring to ignore. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if someone sees us?" "Let them see," he replied, a hint of defiance in his tone. "This is about us." The tension in the room thickened, swirling around us like a storm waiting to break. I could feel the heat radiating from him, and it stirred something deep inside me. I wanted to lean closer, to bridge the gap between us, but I also knew the risks. I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send me tumbling down. Just then, the office phone rang, a jarring reminder of reality. I turned my head away, but Jake's hand shot out, brushing against mine. The contact sent a jolt of electricity coursing through me, igniting a fire I'd tried to suppress for so long. I looked back at him, my breath catching in my throat. "Let's meet tonight," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Just you and me. No one will know." I hesitated, torn between my loyalty to David and the undeniable pull I felt towards Jake. "What about David?" I asked, my heart racing at the thought of betraying him. "Forget about him for a moment," Jake urged, his eyes searching mine. "This is about what we want, what we feel. We can't deny it any longer." I knew he was right. The connection I felt with Jake was something I couldn't ignore. It was a fire, wild and consuming, and I was terrified but exhilarated at the thought of getting burned. "Okay," I finally said, my voice trembling. "Tonight." A smile broke across his face, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "Great. Just us. I'll pick you up at 7. As I left the meeting room, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I felt alive, but also scared. The excitement coursing through me was intoxicating, but I couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at my insides. The day dragged on, each hour feeling like an eternity. I found it hard to focus on work, my thoughts drifting back to Jake and the promise of tonight. I didn't want to think of the implications, the consequences of what could happen. When the clock finally struck 5, I felt a rush of adrenaline flood my veins. I quickly gathered my things and headed out, my heart racing as I made my way home. David was there, smiling and asking about my day, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I forced a smile and played the part of the dutiful wife, but my mind was elsewhere. As evening fell, I found myself getting ready, my heart pounding with anticipation. I chose a dress that made me feel confident, knowing that Jake would appreciate it. I caught my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize myself. I looked alive, vibrant, ready to embrace the thrill of the unknown. When the doorbell rang, I felt a rush of nerves. I opened the door, and there he was. Jake, standing in the dim light, looking every bit as seductive as I remembered. "Wow," he said, his eyes roaming over me. "You look incredible." "Thanks," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "You clean up well too." He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Shall we?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that sent shivers down my spine. As we drove through the city, the excitement and tension between us grew. We arrived at a quiet bar, the atmosphere intimate and perfect for our secretive rendezvous. We talked and laughed, the chemistry between us undeniable, but as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing with fire. I knew there would be consequences, yet the thrill of the moment drowned out the nagging voice of reason in my head. Hours later, as we walked back to the car, Jake took my hand, his touch igniting a spark I couldn't resist. I looked up at him, my heart racing again, and saw the desire reflected in his eyes. "Let's not think about anything else tonight," he said, pulling me closer. I nodded, knowing that the night was ours to seize, no matter what lay ahead. In that moment, I chose to embrace the chaos, ready to surrender to the thrill of our connection and the dangerous game we were playing. I arrived at the office that night, the usual hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of coffee filling the air. But something felt different. There was a tension that hung in the air, thick and electric. I made my way to the conference room, my heart racing with anticipation. Tonight was not just another late night at work. It felt like the beginning of something I had tried so hard to ignore. As I pushed the door open, I was greeted by the sight of Jake leaning casually against the wall, a confident smirk playing on his lips. "You came," he said, his voice low and inviting. My breath hitched at the sight of him, the way his eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper. "I wasn't sure if you would." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, sealing away the world outside. "I couldn't resist," I admitted, my pulse quickening. The moment felt charged, as if everything we had been dancing around was about to explode. Jake took a step closer, his gaze intense. "I've been thinking about this all day," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. about us. My heart raced as his words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I glanced around the empty room, the quiet echo of our breaths the only sound. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. I was afraid of where this conversation might lead us, but I was equally terrified of turning back. "Come on, you know what I mean," he said, stepping even closer. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, drawing me in. The tension, the chemistry, it's undeniable. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "But Jake, this is wrong. I'm married." The words felt like a barrier between us, but I knew they were more for me than for him. "David doesn't have to know," he said, his voice smooth like silk. "We can keep this between us. Just one night, no strings attached." I wanted to argue, to stand firm against the temptation that was pulling me in. But his eyes, dark and filled with promise, made it hard to remember why I should resist. "You don't understand," I said weakly, feeling the weight of my own conscience pressing down on me. "I have a life, responsibilities." "And what about your happiness?" he countered, his brow furrowing in concern. "You deserve to feel alive, to feel wanted." His words struck a chord deep within me. I thought of the evenings spent with David, the routine that had become so mundane, and my heart ached for something more. "You don't know what you're asking," I said, my voice trembling. But even as I spoke, I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crumble. "Maybe I do," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe I know exactly what you need." The air between us crackled with unspoken desire. I looked into his eyes, searching for clarity, but all I found was an intoxicating allure that pulled me closer. "Jake," I breathed, unsure of where my words were leading. Without another word, he closed the distance between us, his lips crashing against mine in a heated kiss that ignited every nerve in my body. I melted against him, my hands finding their way to his hair, pulling him closer, as if that would somehow erase the boundaries I had spent so long trying to uphold. When we finally pulled apart, I gasped for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice shaky and filled with confusion. "Something we both want," he replied, his forehead resting against mine. "Just let go, even if it's just for tonight." The sound of the door closing behind us echoed in my mind, sealing our fate. I knew I was crossing a line I could never uncross, but in that moment, all I could feel was the heat of his body against mine, and the thrill of living in the moment. I tangled my fingers in his shirt, feeling the fabric beneath my fingertips, the heat radiating from his skin. "This doesn't have to happen, you know," I whispered, half-heartedly trying to convince myself more than him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his breath warm against my lips. "Because I can tell you want this as much as I do." I didn't answer, because he was right. I wanted this. I wanted him. The thought sent waves of excitement coursing through me, drowning out the voice of reason that screamed for me to stop. Before I could think any longer, Jake captured my lips again, deeper this time, as if sealing a pact between us. The kiss deepened, turning into something fierce, something primal. He pulled me closer, his hands finding their way to my waist, and I melted against him, surrendering to the moment. As we broke apart again, breathless, I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of remorse or hesitation. Instead, I found a fierce determination. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice thick with desire. I closed my eyes, letting myself be swept away by the thrill of it all. I knew I was treading dangerous waters, but the danger only added to the excitement. In that empty office, with the world outside forgotten, I felt free for the first time in a long time. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, no matter the consequences.